Hi, I'm Rich Baker from Rollin' and Riches, and this is Improv Breakdown.
Do you ever stop listening when someone's talking?
Sure.
Yes, because you either say yes or you're a liar, right?
Any different things?
Like suggest I was
My hands. It's like
Yeah.
You asked for it.
yay!
Well, welcome to the Improv Breakdown. I'm very excited today to have with me improviser, instructor, theater owner, corporate improv trainer, all-around kick-ass human being, Courtney Pong. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Courtney, at one point in your life, you were not an improviser, and then you became one. Please tell me the journey of how that happened.
Well, I'm from a very small town in California, and I went to high school. They didn't really teach you, nobody taught me how to apply to college or anything. So I was at the junior college, just, getting some $11 a unit education.
Nice.
Good. But I think I worked at a video store, and in my town, it's very much like you learn a trade. And then comedy sports is where it all started, which was somebody from the San Jose comedy sports team came through our hometown and was like, hey, we're going to open up a small version over here, and we want to do like a farm team, I guess. We just want to audition people and see if they want to do this improv company. We'll teach you comedy sports. So I auditioned because of a boy, and he's a pastor now with like 5 kids. But I was in a junior college class, and the pinnacle moment is my junior college teacher in theater was like, I don't really think that you understand acting. I don't think you get this, but
Real supportive and encouraging. Just like, I don't think you get it.
He did. He said, I don't think you get it. He goes, but have you ever tried improv comedy? And I said, I have not. So we brought somebody in to do a workshop with us. And it just so happened the exact same time, Justin Worsham came through our town and said, I'm auditioning for this improv company. And I was like, well, I didn't hate the workshop, so I'll go to this thing. And then they put me in the cast. They taught me comedy sports along with teaching me just the basics of improv. And then that was 19 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had a teacher who was like, no acting, but I've got this other thing you might like. And had you even heard of improv at that point?
No, I don't even think I recognized it as a separate art form. I think it was like I'd watch SNL with my dad every once in a while, and I knew Whose Line existed, but I didn't associate improv with Whose Line. I was like, oh, Whose Line is that anyway? It's a funny show and they play games.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I still use Whose Line sometimes when I meet someone who doesn't know improv, and I'm like, have you seen Whose Line? It's our ambassador.
21. That's what you do. You just make it up. It's fine.
Just make it up. Very cool. So that was 19 years ago. So you've been at this a while. What do you love about the art form that keeps you doing it? So
I would say I guess this is my maybe possibly unpopular mantra. I like improv. I love comedy sports. That's always, I was like, I like the idea of, I like the foundational skills of improv. I love teaching them. And comedy sports was really what kept me around, which was I liked the game aspect of it. I liked the format. I liked that it was a long form narrative with short form broken up in between. I liked that there was rhyming and guessing games, and there was all these different things going on. It was a dream for my brain that was like trying to focus on like, what should my major be? I'll change it 8 times. So I think comedy sports the format appealed to me. The product appealed to me because it was a for everyone show. And then the community attracted me. So I think that grew my love of improv. Comedy sports is that nice platform that went, oh, you like all these games? The foundation of these games are these core skills. And I go, oh, well, then I guess I like all those core skills. So,
looks like I like that the whole time. Who knew?
Why don't you just tell us? So I definitely glommed on to just learning comedy sports and having a fun time with something, and then realizing, oh, there's like a whole thing behind this. All right, well, I'll learn it. So.
Nice. So, if you can think back, I know 19 years has been a while, but what is there a lesson that you learned when you were going through classes or workshops or whatnot that you later as a performer went, oh, that's not really how that lesson doesn't jive with what I've discovered on stage?
Yes. So specifically, yes. And I think when you
never heard of it. What's that?
It's a thing. Flash sex act. I think when you learn the basics. Actually, I remember this very clearly because I had learned some basics of improv, taught comedy sports, and then somebody took me to the Chicago Improv Festival, and I took my very first extra classes outside of the people that I had known. And I remember it was Annoyance Theater at the time, and they were trying to teach us, to just hold on to your shit. And I was like, but you're supposed to. So, and then I watched people in class fight the teacher and be like, that's not how we learned it. And I was like, oh, there are different ways to teach this shit. Okay. So I got really excited going, so there are nuances to all of these rules, and sometimes they're left up for interpretation. So yes and was a big one that I also talk a lot about when I teach, because my favorite thing to do is teach improv to non-improvisers, non-performance. I just like teaching it to companies and groups and college kids. And yes and is a huge one where we, when you're first learning it, you teach people to literally say yes and add on. But if you boil the yes and down to its distill it down to its most basic parts, is just embracing something is happening and making a choice and moving forward. So in one ways it's mindfulness, but I also like to bring up, like, how do you yes and the stuff that's not as fun? Like, it's easy to yes and a road trip or, come skydiving with me, but how do you yes and losing your job? How do you yes and going through a once in a century pandemic? How do you yes and, an unfavorable outcome? And I think that's the stuff I started to dig into and going, oh, this is nothing like I thought it was. You don't literally have to say the words yes and, you just need to embrace that something is happening. So even in a scene, if somebody says, for classic example, you're late on the rent, and you just say, you don't have to say yes, I'm late on the rent. You can just acknowledge that the situation exists. You're just acknowledging the reality, which is what that's why I like to see it bleed into other parts of life. But yeah, I think yes and was a really big one. I was like, you mean, like, it's like way more nuanced, and I think that's a big one.
Very cool. I love that. Kind of in the same vein, what is something that that you teach now that you're like, oh, I just got that, like, this wasn't even on the radar, and I learned this from performing, like, not necessarily contradicting what you learned, but just something brand new that you were like, oh, they didn't teach me this at all.
Give me an example. What's something that fits that category for you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like, for example, like one sentence at a time. Like when I improvise now, I realize that if I just say one sentence, that I'm going to have a lot better odds than if I just meander on and talk a lot, which I never got that in any of my classes growing up. And I was like, oh, this is a lesson that's very important.
Okay. I would say one big thing, probably silence. Ooh. Silence, just so you can feel, well, okay, let me backtrack. Less about silence and more about taking a second to just take a beat and have a feeling about it. So maybe actually this is, I think, something, a lot of what we teach and reteach, it's kind of, it's cobbled together from different teachers, and then somehow you decide your own language around it. Yeah. But something I really have leaned into in the past few years is focusing on, when we're teaching level 1, is focusing on, I'm so blank that it makes me want to blank. I'm so, there are only 4 emotions: mad, glad, sad, afraid, right? So I'm so happy, it makes me want to physically do what do you want to do, right? So it's easy in a scene to say, to express it, it's a yes and. I'm so happy, and what does it make you want to do? It makes me want to kick over this trash can. So that's how we to break down how we get more motion in a scene. How do we get things going? How do we make stuff happen? Is I'm so stopping a scene or just side coaching and saying, what are you feeling right now? I feel angry. Great. You are so angry. What does it make you want to do? It makes you want to kick over this trash can. Great. Let's go do that. And let's see what comes out of that. So I'm so blank that it makes me want to blank. I think I've really hung on to that one in the past few years.
That's great. I've never heard that one. I'm stealing that one. Fantastic. Yeah.
I don't even need a quarter. Take it. I forgot who started that. Somebody, maybe in the comedy sports family, was like, if you use someone's bit, you owe them a quarter. And I'm like, that's fair.
Okay. Are there any like I should have put a better way of phrasing this when I wrote it down. Is there like a move or a style of improv that you're just like, that's not my thing, I don't do that, that kind of rubs me the wrong way?
Well, I don't know if it rubs me the wrong way, but I know that I'm super bad at it, and I think all my friends know, which I cannot do Shakespeare improv to save my gosh darn life, and it is so tough to see me struggle because I was with the San Jose Comedy Sports for 15 years, and we didn't only do comedy sports. We also had a long form show that we went on every Friday night, and we would try different formats every single time. And so we did everything from musical improv to where I was like, I used to hate it. And now I'm like, I'll sit in. Like I'm willing to be curious and learn. Like we would do genre prov. I love a good buddy cop, right? That's my favorite genre, or a heist genre. But it's always the nights when they're like, we're gonna do Shakespeare. I'm like, you do not want to see this because it's it's the gift. Like Shakespeare escape. Growing up, I was like, in theater classes, I was like, this is so boring to me. Maybe it wasn't taught to me, or I just didn't have the open mind for it. But then it's like trying to chase an ice cream truck and then you lose it entirely. You're like, it's gone. It'll never be interesting to me. So when we were teaching it as a genre, I was like, people were teaching me about like, here are the types of characters, here are the things that they say in the language. But the gift of gab is like, it doesn't roll off the tongue for me. So I'll be in a scene trying to do Shakespeare. I'm like, fuck. Like, when you do like, there's even like the comparisons of like your hair is as long as I can't even do it now. They try and teach you all these different devices that you could put on your tool belt of how to sound in the Shakespearean genre. But my brain just completely collapses and is like, please don't make me do this. And I feel so bad because I think people are watching going, that poor girl.
Oh, yeah. Good. Yeah, it's fair. And Shakespeare comes up a lot in comedy sports, right? Like you play Shakespeare Switch or Shakespeare Blitz. There's like a lot of Shakespeare games. So you're just like, nah, none of that.
It's usually, no matter what, unless it's Emotional Symphony, anytime somebody says, let's play a game, I'm like, whatever. They're all the same. There are only 4 games in improv. Let's play it. It's only when somebody does the Shakespeare variation, I'm like, you asked for it. I'll play it. But sometimes I'll lean into it and just try my hardest. And sometimes I'll do the cowardly thing and like fall back onto some other trope for myself of like, well, this is how I talk in Shakespearean times. If I'm not from here. I think it's just one of those, I will always be very supportive of the game choice if it's for the audience. Mm-hmm. And also when people say Shakespeare choices, I'm like, I'll play. I'm not your best bet. I just want you to know that. I'm just,
This plane's going to crash, but if that's what you want to see, here we go.
Might there be other things on other games that your teammates might also help them shine? Yeah, that's the part of it is if somebody's insisting on playing something, that's because they really want to play it and won't let go of it. Like I'm always going to ask, like, well, is it good for the audience? If the audience wants to see Shakespeare, then we're doing Shakespeare. Sure. If the audience doesn't need to see it, and it's just because you want to play it and I suck at it, then you're being a dick. So.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point that I want to talk about long form, but let's tangent off this for a second. Does the audience need it, right? So one thing that comedy sports taught me that I really didn't get at all from any kind of long form teaching or anything, that was reading the audience. And I think that is maybe the most valuable skill that I have ever worked on as far as any kind of improv, short form or long form. But like, comedy sports seems to be really good at that, but I don't see it elsewhere. Like, can you talk about like reading the audience and how you learn that and like what that means to you?
So it means a lot to me. I think one of the best, it never surprises me that people have these wonderful stories of interacting with comedy sports people or a comedy sports theater, burned in their brain and memories with their families. I think comedy sports, just the nature of what it means to read an audience is we are fine-tuning the skills of meeting someone where they're at, rather than demanding that they be where we are, demanding that they this isn't a Shakespeare audience, but we're going to make them a Shakespeare audience, and going, no, we want to meet them where they're at. And I want to live in a world where, people meet each other where they're at with empathy and kindness and understanding. So I think that's a huge part of why it's so important to me to read the audience, is we want to know where they are. What's the other half of that question is why is it important to me? What was the first
like,
part?
how do you do it? Like, what does it mean to you? Like when you I'm going to read the audience, like, what are you doing?
So I think it's paying attention to, it's keeping one foot in the match, in the show, in the comedy sports show, and one foot in the audience. So you're not just, this is why I like it, probably because my brain needs a lot, is there's a lot of different things going on at once. It's, yes, there's the ref balancing, what does the ref need? There's looking at the captains and going, well, what does the team need? What kind of character do you need to play tonight? But then also looking in the audience and going, what group has not yelled out a suggestion yet? And like trying to just dissect the audience and go, okay, well, there are kids in front of these adults. They're drowning out the adults. There are college kids over here, and being able to look at like a map, and it's more like a chess game to play of like, okay, we gave the group of kids, the 9-year-olds at a sleepover, we gave them a huge chunk of the show. We want to make sure we balance it out. So, and you're just reading faces. Like I will constantly, if I'm in a match, I will be looking around, trying not to be distracting, but I will be looking around at all the other things, all the other touch points in a match, from the box office person to, the kid in the back row who is in the back but should be in the front because he's tiny and he needs to be in a front seat, but he can't see very well. So you're going to want to make sure you play to him because you want to make sure they feel special. Every single person should leave there feeling like the show was somehow made them feel special, or we did something for them. So it's a little something for everybody. And I would say that's maybe not for everybody, but it appeals to me as a people pleaser. Maybe that's really what it is. But it appeals to me because it's like a game I get to play every night, which is my favorite thing in the world. As long as I've been doing comedy sports, junior high school boys are the worst because let me finish. They're so fun and rowdy, and they've learned all the quotes from whatever the movie is, so Napoleon Dynamite, Ace Ventura, whatever the thing is. They're yelling the same thing out over and over. They crack me up because it is something to wrangle that group. So it's almost like there are things to conquer. There sometimes when you're younger days, when you walk out on the stage and you're the only woman, sometimes you got to win the high school girls over because it's just like they're not used to always seeing a woman on stage back then. But then you move into now, it's like sometimes my favorite is the family that comes to comedy sports, and there's the older high school kid and the younger kids, and the high school kid does not want to be there with their family. And I look at them and go, your face says it all, but I will win you over before this match is over. And I think I love those challenges of like, I want everyone to feel welcome and included and feel acknowledged in that space. And to me, it's just a big game, and it's a big challenge of like, I want everybody to feel good. So let's do that.
Amazing. So you brought up long form, because I only know as a short form player, but can you talk about like how long form entered your life, since comedy sports was like the first thing, and then like how does long form and short form still factor into your play and help each other?
Yeah, so long form was a part of my, as soon as I started, excuse me, I'm drinking kombucha, and it's very gassy. So when I first started learning comedy sports, we also were learning different types of improv. So somebody I think started off with teaching me the Armando and a montage, because those were very, they were in a sense, comedy sports games, but also just drawn out a little bit longer. You had short spurts. So that was my first foray into it. And then my long form journey was alongside doing comedy sports 2 days a week. There was always the Friday night midnight show, which was at 10 o'clock because we got older. So the midnight show on Fridays, we would just rotate what the show was. So we would do anything from an Armando, we'd try a Harold, we'd do all these different names that mean nothing to anybody, the different formats. And I think one of the big things is I didn't shy away from learning it, and I could see how it would help in short form, because I think the biggest thing is, well, these are tools. They're just tools, and who turns down free tools? So I never understood. I couldn't really get behind the whole which form is better than the other. I was like, they're all very useful. You just got to choose when you want to use them. You're not always going to need the same short form skills when you're doing short form. So the narrative that you learn, some of the narrative that you learn on long form, I was like, I would like to put that in comedy sports. Like, why wouldn't you want to see the cross section of that stuff? So that's that piece. And then how it informs my work now, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, is how I think comedy sports gets a lot of like, well, it's short form and it's a gimmick. And I was like, oh, contraire, mon frere. You ever see WWE? Comedy sports is a long form with short form inside of it. It's a full narrative. There is a specific, you've got to have, you've got these beats to hit, but everything else in between are games within games. So not only do you have the start of comedy sports, the ending of the reading off the final score, you also have the challenge round where each team plays a game. But inside of that, you also have these two characters that have maybe a sports rivalry, right? Then maybe you have this character over here, and these are just players on the bench. Maybe for tonight, their character is like the hometown heroes, right? So everything they do when they walk up on stage, they kind of have that bravado with them. So it's like a game within a game. It's like a Russian nesting doll of different types of improv. And I think, again, it appeals to different types of folks. I think it appeals to me because I'm like, oh, there's always something to work on. You'll never be done. So I think that's how it informs it, as I see, especially now in these past 4 years, of seeing the full narrative of like, oh, this is a full 90-minute long, taking the audience on a journey from the minute we introduce the ref, we introduce the players, the characters, and because they're playing characters inside the characters. So I think that's where I see it. It doesn't always get that rap, but that's how I see it.
Do you still do long form, or are you just mainly doing the comedy sports now?
Just mainly doing comedy sports.
Yeah. Do you miss long form at all? Do you like, I want to do this form again or something like that?
It's not that here's the thing. It's not that I don't miss long form. It's that I really love comedy sports. And I'm such a devotee because I really love how joyful it feels. It's just very silly and fun. And I like doing improvised rap, and I like doing clue giving and clue guessing. And I love gibberish, and I do like how silly it is, but not silly like fart jokes, silly like it's just allowed to be fun. Like, not that long form isn't fun, but it's supposed to be, we want you to smile. We want you to laugh. We want you to have a good time with your family. And that appeals to me. I'm less, this sounds so terrible. I'm less interested in like pushing boundaries in the art form. And I'm very happy doing this show that I know I love watching it bring joy to people. So I think it's less about not liking long form. It's more about, I just really love comedy sports.
Yeah, it doesn't sound terrible to me. Like, some people who want to push boundaries, let them go do that. You found a thing that you love that brings joy to people. You're killing it.
Yeah.
At one point, you weren't a teacher. How did you become a teacher? Did you know you wanted to be? Like, tell me that journey.
I did not know at all. In fact, I would say, I think the first time was when I was in Modesto. They were like, let's teach you we wanted to launch our high school league. So they're like, let's teach you how to teach high school kids. But no, I'll say this, very few people were teaching me how to teach improv. They were telling me, you can just share what you've learned because you have experience. So I was like, okay. And if you're not from an education background, no one's teaching you how to teach, right? Yeah. So I think I think back about my first 10 years of doing comedy sports and teaching improv. It was like, thank God I was like, fun, I guess, because there's kids. So it's like, I think back about how I ran high school workshops. I was like, oh, we could have been working in small groups. We could have been getting way more reps in. So now that, and it was, oh, my dog just peed on the rug.
No.
Fine. Oh, sweetheart. Okay. So I would say that when it wasn't until maybe 2015, 2014, when Alex Grindelin from the Seattle team, with Ben Lidgis, we're teaching this class of improv pedagogy. And like, here's how, not just teaching improv, but teaching improv, the best way to teach improv in different fashions. So they were teaching about how to like really make sure that your curriculum was serving the population, not passing your knowledge on to somebody else. So I think that really opened my brain to where, again, maybe it's because it felt like a puzzle to solve, but I really got interested in teaching and teaching things well. So now I love it so much. It's my favorite thing in the world. I will do as much as I can to teach workshops to beginning improvisers and introduce it. But I think when I first started teaching, I was like, I don't mind sharing. I love sharing what I have, but it doesn't feel exciting. It feels like I'm just pontificating off of what I've learned. I was like, is that exciting for people? And thank God they loved it because they wanted to keep doing it. I just want to go back and be like, I could have taught you way better. Just, different ways of teaching that now I know. So now I know.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, like, what makes for a good improv teacher, in your opinion?
I think, in addition to what I think the base foundation of is creating a mindful space, creating a place where people are supportive of each other, and that it's inclusive and diverse, and allows for that. I think that's the base level. I think beyond that, what makes a good improv teacher? I'm really a big believer in meeting people where they're at. I think a lot of improv can get shopped around as like daring people to step outside their comfort zone and be like, be bold, be brave, be courageous. And like some people don't respond positively to that. Sometimes it's a lot to ask people. It's as if you said, like, hey, you want to fly forward 90 miles an hour by the seat of your pants? And somebody says, I don't want to do that. And you go, no, you'll like it. It's fun. And I think like everybody needs a little bit of something different. So I think the ability as a teacher to meet someone where they're at instead of demanding that they be where you want them to be or where you think they should be, I think that's a huge strength and you grow that over time of like, sometimes the class is not on track on the syllabus that you have laid out. So like, how do you change your curriculum and how do you adapt to meet them so that they still feel successful and they still want to do it? Because they're not going to learn at the rate that you want them to learn. You just have to, I think that's a big thing is, can you meet them where they're at and can you grow them so that they feel these little wins every single time they step into your class and they want to come back? I think that's a big thing.
I'm Okay.
keep it
Yeah. I'm seeing a theme. You want to meet the audience where they're at. You want to meet the students where you're at. You just want to meet people where they're at. That's just your thing.
Yeah, I think that's a huge, especially now with everything going on about examining injustice and inequality. I think as everybody is on their different paths of what they're learning and how they're learning it, it's so unreasonable to believe that you should be where I want you to be or where I think I think that you should be, because we came from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And we grew up differently. Like there's no way I would know the exact same things you know. Even I have a twin sister. Even my twin sister and I have a very different background of based on how we had different paths, and I went to college and she stayed in the hometown and she learned a trade. It's just a different bank. So it's like, it's just so unreasonable to think that people should be where we want them to be. So why would you stress out and get mad at them when you could just help them feel successful so that they feel small wins, so they feel bigger wins, and blah, blah, blah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite warm-up or exercise that you love to teach?
I do have a favorite exercise I like to teach.
Yeah.
So there is, oh man. So there is this exercise I really love, and it always does really well in our classes, is we teach, I just taught this today. We teach what's called ABC speak. So you'll get with a buddy and we're going to speak. We're going to have a conversation about our favorite music, but you're going to start your sentence with the first letter of the alphabet. I'm going to respond with the next letter and you're going to go back and forth. So Let's try it. Ready?
Okay.
All right. Talk about our favorite music. You're going to start off. Go.
Always a big fan of Van Halen.
Being honest, never listen to them. That band.
Can't recommend them enough.
Do you have anybody else that I might know?
Everybody likes Led Zeppelin.
Fine choice, even though I didn't really grow up with them either. Them, that band. All right, so let's stop there. So we've have you done this one before?
No.
Okay, so we'll do ABC speak. So you go back and forth through the alphabet. Most people make it to around L, M. Some people brag and I made it to Z. Not the point. But though you'll go through the alphabet. Then we'll do another round. We're going to do a different conversation. This time we're going to talk about our favorite things to drink, right? But instead of doing ABC speak, you're going to start off the conversation. You can start with whatever letter you want, but the very last letter of your very last word is going to be the very first letter of my response. And then the very last letter, and we'll go back and forth, right?
Gotcha.
So start us off. Favorite drinks?
I'm a big fan of soda water.
Really? Me too. There is a soda water vendor here called Polar Seltzer, and they're based out of Massachusetts, and they're like, it's the La Croix of the East Coast.
Totally sounds good to me. I just drink bubbly all the time.
Everyone I know drinks bubbly too. I think it's easier to find if you're running around like a Target or a City Target. I really recently got into Spindrift.
Totally not familiar with that one.
Exceptional is what it is. It's like the founder story is amazing. It's sparkling water with like a little bit of fruit juice. So it's just like a little something extra.
Awesome.
Cool, great, end time. So we might actually let that go on quite a bit longer, but and again, my favorite thing to do is teach improv to make improv accessible to non-improv people.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. Is the very quick debrief is ABC speak. Do you ever speak like that in your regular life?
No.
Yeah. What if we go about 30,000 feet higher? Do you ever stop listening when someone's talking?
Sure.
Yes, because you either say yes or you're a liar, right? We naturally do. It is very common in the exercise for people to say the response is usually, I actually didn't even need to listen to what the person was saying because I could just spend time planning ahead and thinking about what I needed to say, right? The second exercise is focused on, you actually have to listen to somebody all the way through, hear their complete thought all the way to the very end until you can even think about what your response is going to be. So there is less planning in the second one. Neither one is good or bad. They just have very specific purposes. So in the case of improv, or even just basic communication, ABC speak relieves you of the having to listen to somebody all the way through. It relieves you from having to actually consider what their answers are, and you can just do whatever you want. To me, is that a kind of conversation you ever want to be in? Probably not, no. But the second one, you actually can never interrupt anybody in the second exercise. In fact, you need to make sure that you have listened to them and acknowledged them and fully heard them. A basic human need is to want to be heard and understood and acknowledged. So there are a lot of takeaways out of this exercise, but one of my favorite ones is just a tool we can put on our belt of something that we have in our power to help other people feel acknowledged and heard and just taken care of. I mean, it's a gift you can give somebody else. The last thing I really like about this exercise is you'll notice like a lot of words end with the same letters, right?
Yeah,
like,
E's a lot, yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about that of like, and we'll ask the group, did anybody find themselves changing their last words so that their buddy had something more to work with? And some people will say, yeah, I did. And we talk about, well, that's what a two-way conversation is. It's not just taking. You've got to be giving as much as you're taking. So when you're having a conversation with someone, make sure that you're participating in a way that says like, we're doing this together, not just take, right? So there's a lot of stuff, but that's my favorite exercise.
I love it. That's cool. Yeah. I never knew that one. Right. So you were a teacher, and then at one point you upped the game again and became an owner of a theater. Is that something that you knew? Like you like one day I want to be an owner, or like tell me the story of that.
No, you know what's funny? I don't even think I'm pretty sure I wrote this down somewhere. I know I would never have started a brand new Comedy Sports or a brand new CSZ, which is our license, ever. The only reason I'm out in Boston is because the original owner and manager in Boston, he had opened it for like 2 years, and he was like, I'm not really feeling it for the short version. And there was word on the street he was looking to sell the license. So the idea was that if he didn't sell it, it potentially could close. Like they would just wrap up the license, not produce it anymore, not do anything. And then the team that we had met just kind of would disband. Yeah. And I think what kills me is that after doing this for 15 years, it's like San Jose was such a strong community, and the worldwide is such a strong community that I have definitely experienced. It was like the thought of a team not getting the same experience that I got was like so heartbreaking. And like Boston's a great city for this, and I had never been to Boston, but I think it was like I tell this story a lot. Is like I told Jeff Kramer, who owns the San Jose location, I was like, I don't want to leave, but I just can't stay. Like you just kind of felt that calling. So I eventually purchased the license in Boston after months of obsessing over it, and then I moved out there, and I've been here ever since. So I've been the owner and the manager since 2016, and then in 2019 we finally found a little space to rent in Boston, and we opened up a theater, and now it's shut down. Oh.
Damn the timing.
But it's still there. It's still standing in a very supportive community, and I know that when we're back, we will be back. We'll be coming back. So.
Wow. So you're the onus to be an owner wasn't because you wanted it. It was because like there was a need, and you were like, I want to help this need.
I think so. There are a couple different factors, but I think one of the biggest things, it's not as if I was like, well, I've never dealt with money before, but we'll give it a try. I did have a lot of my background concurrently with CSC and Comedy Sports, because I have a background in public relations, communications, marketing, internal comms. So my career was in public relations and in health tech. So I had bounced around different startups in San Francisco and San Jose, and had gotten to, because I worked in so many small environments and internal environments, I spent a lot of time working cross-functionally with the customer service team, the engineers, the designers, the CEO. So I had a very privileged insight into how companies run and what the gaps were, what the advantages were. And that was so exciting to me. It was like, well, I think the untold portion that I don't often talk about is that I was definitely, meeting a lot of startups with these founders, and it was a lot of like, I never quite found the leadership that I wanted. I will say I was at a lot of companies with a lot of white male leadership, and it was very homogenous. It was always kind of the same outpouring, except for my very first job was this fantastic woman in the Bay Area. And I think over time it was like, I'm just so tired of trying to find better leadership. Why don't we just become the leadership that we want? Like, why would I just keep searching for the leadership why don't I just go create it? So I think that was a huge part of it. It was like, well, I want to make a place where people, where people can feel like they are getting good leadership, or at least learning how to be good leaders, that kind of stuff.
What have you learned from, you had so much experience in different ways, but like being the boss, I'm assuming you've probably, some things have been illuminated in the position that you were like, oh, I didn't expect this, or I learned this, or this was different, or like, what has that been like?
It's so people heavy. And I think I knew that, but it's exponential. It's not just it's never just a team of 15 people or a team of 30 people. It's exponential. It's those people and the people in their lives that they bring in also as our outside family. And then there's so much involved with people management and understanding everybody has a different center of wants and what motivates them and how do you communicate with them when they all communicate in different ways. And I think that was, like playing comedy sports and doing improv is like 0.5% of my job. The rest of it is, and I'm at every show. Nearly every show. But the parts that you don't see are, it's the bookkeeping. It's especially if you're if you're a solopreneur, you're doing it alone for your first time. The first few years are, you're your own bookkeeper and accountant, and then you learn to hire people for that stuff. And then you stop doing it. You're the marketer, you're the everything, but spreadsheets and Google Docs and Canva was only a part of it. The rest of it is just making sure that the team is set up for success and that they have what they need and that they feel welcome. And that means communicating to 30 people and their brigade outside to make sure everyone is not necessarily happy, but feels like they're in a place where they can be themselves and authentic. And that's a lot of work. So I think one thing I'll highlight is that I think is worth it is when I first got here and we finally broke down and decided to do our first round of tryouts with me here, we reimagined the process. We kind of just broke it down. We're like, we're going to run it like a workshop. It's not going to be like an audition where you show up, do 5 minutes and then leave. So we ran it like a 90-minute, 2-hour workshop where we taught people comedy, sports, games. And then we ran through it in repetition like a workshop. And then at the end, we had 65 people try out. And instead of an email, we called everybody individually. I did, and let them know what the next step was, whether they were moving forward or whether or not we'd like to keep getting to know them and come back to the next tryout. So I think that was a huge part of it. It's very much a people business. And somebody said this today is we're in the trust building business. And the only way you build trust is by getting to know people personally. Not everybody was down for that idea. Some people would have preferred an email, maybe. Some people maybe didn't enjoy the phone call, but I think it was, at the end of the day, we just have to show who we are and be authentic. And I felt better about just calling people and having a conversation, or at least extending the opportunity to open up a dialogue and get to know them. So just things like that, I think, are hopefully making a difference here. I don't know.
I love it because I've always had a problem in, short form, long form, doesn't matter. Like this idea of like show up, audition, and then leave because, if you're improvising, like if we were both auditioning for the same thing, like my job is to make you look good. How are we auditioning? I always thought it was weird. I think that's a great thing of like, so people knew it was an audition, but they also knew it was a workshop going into it.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think we definitely did a lot of work to message before and after, which was here's exactly what we're looking for. This is not about being perfect. It's not about not messing up. We want to, and then when we did our callbacks, we also invited people to just take workshops with us as the company. We just want to see if you want to work on this stuff consistently. Can you be coached? Do you work well with the rest of the team? Are you open to coaching yourself? Like, are you open to sharing? Because as much as we have stuff for you to learn, we know that we can learn from you too. So we wanted to see what kinds of folks we were working with was the environment good for them, right? So it wasn't about, it's like, you don't have to be a perfect improviser. We can't train our improvisers to be perfect. That's so unreasonable. But what we can do is like, we want to find people that can move on quickly from mistakes, that can start even if they don't know the whole thing. We want to meet people who, if you're playing comedy sports, have the game brain for it. There's just, I believe that it opens it up to really reimagine the skills that we think we're looking for, which I think also ties into diversity and inclusion. When we talk about how do we get more diverse audiences, it means breaking off from what we always thought we were looking for in auditions and really reimagining. It's like, do you really want someone who is good at finding their where, or are you really looking for somebody who those skills show up in different fashions, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So like engineers, that kind of stuff.
I dig it. Okay, obviously I know that this is very nuanced and it depends on who's asking, but in a general way, someone who's never done improv before, they say, Courtney, I want to do improv. I want to take my first improv class. Do you have any advice that you're like, oh, you should know this?
Oh, if they're going to take their very first one?
Yeah.
I mean, I think as a base level, which probably can seem very boring and logistical, I would say look for a theater to make sure they have things like a code of conduct in place. so that they're focusing on protecting their students from the inside out.
Oh, yeah.
Look for a theater where they're transparent about what their involvement is in the community. Is it on their website? Are they outspoken about how socially involved they are? Maybe it's not exactly what you specifically want for your life, but as an improv theater that is in the community, you want to make sure that they're taking care of people beyond just their team. Are their students protected? Are their teachers held to a high standard? So I think those are little tick marks that can help tip you off to whether or not the theater is really doing the work from the inside out, or at least it's a starting point, as opposed to, flashy things like, well, they've taught all around the world and they've taken workshops with ABC people. It's like, well, that's a very cosmetic thing, and they could, but are they, is this a place you want to spend your time? Do you like their values? Do they have values? I think that's an important thing, which can be a very mundane answer and not as sexy, but I've always been less driven by like a flashy name and more excited about, like, I don't know, do they have a strong set of core values? Do they have a strong teaching, a way of how they conduct themselves in the classroom? Like, I don't think improv teachers should be hanging out and drinking beers with their students and, in private places, like that kind of stuff. I'm like, you want to research what people are saying about the teachers.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, sexy answer or not, like that's like it's not something that I think a lot of us tend to think about. People go, oh, it's this is UCB or this is Comedy Sports or whatever, this is a name, so I'll take it there. But like to do that background research and go, is this a place where you're going to jive with their values and their knowing about them? That's really good.
I think, it's, you're going to meet a person who takes an improv class, they never forget their first improv teacher, and they usually think of that person as the gospel truth until they meet more people. I sure did, absolutely. Yeah. But I think the more you can impress on people, it's not about the teacher themselves. It's about meeting different types of teachers. Everybody teaches differently, and you're just collecting knowledge. There's not one way. It opens up the door of like, now just go look for places that do good work. Now go look for places that hold themselves to a high standard and take all the classes you can from those different teachers.
Yeah. Oh, I love that guy. I hate the old, and I know everyone didn't think this, but the old model of like a guru of like, follow this person, which, Del Close was the embodiment of that. And it's just like led to a lot of bad stuff. Yeah. We've already kind of pretty much hinted to this. What are the big changes that you've been seeing in your 19 years of improv with the art form in general?
Yeah, so the first thing is much more representation and much more of a focus on inclusion and equity. That's not to say that we are anywhere by any means there. We are not, there is no destination, but I will say there is more of an understanding of, actually, here's a good example. I was in a panel tonight and a woman was talking about, she's Latinx, and she was saying how she was in an improv workshop or a class one day, and the class was making a reference about, some TV show they all grew up with, and she did not as a Latinx person. And then she made a reference to a telenovela, and the teacher said to her, you can't make references that nobody understands, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, right, that's the whole thing. But the flip side of that is, instead of what we normally used to do is go, yeah, you're right, we really should make references the audience doesn't understand. The flip side of that, I think now that people are learning to do, is ask the right questions, which is ask the question of like, I wonder why there aren't more Latinx people in our audience. Let's talk about that, right? Yeah. If people don't understand my reference, that means, does that mean, not asserting or assuming, but does that mean that we don't have we have a very homogenous population? Let's talk about that. So it's not about assigning blame, but I think there are a lot more questions being asked in search of being curious, as opposed to just accepting the gospel truth of like, well, you always do it this way, and this is what we do, and we don't do it this way. And go, well, why? So the biggest, like, jumping out of all of that is what I see now that's changed is there's much more of an understanding of why representation is so important, but then also not to just be diverse, but how do you really truly be inclusive? How do you really make a space where people feel welcome, and cultures are acknowledged and accepted, and everybody is welcome. So I think that's the big emphasis I've seen for the big change. The other big thing I've seen change has been an emphasis on consent and permission, and asking and creating spaces that are safe for improvisers, so that, we're not getting away with things like touching each other inappropriately, or like not asking for permission, and understanding that when you do this art form, it's not a free pass to go touch each other, like you still got it. This general rules of being a decent human being still apply in the art form. And hopefully gone are the days of being able to pass it off of, I was just being funny, or God forbid, like in stand up, like it was just a joke, and going, well, let's talk about that. yeah, it's, you know, it doesn't always have to be this way. You can't just pass off shitty material because it's comedy. It's like, maybe someone, if it's hurting people, let's talk about it.
Yeah, right. Oh, I love it. I love it. In 2005, I'm not going to say who it was because he's actually famous, but there was a student in one of my classes who wasn't famous at the time. And we started a scene. It was our first scene of the first class. He literally just grabbed my face and like kissed me. I'd never met him. I didn't know who he was. You know, and it was the early 2000s. That shit just happened. And like, I don't think you would ever see that now, you know, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, or at least without, maybe hopefully we're in environments now where the teacher will stop and say, you know, we got this from the Columbus folks, is that it's better out than in. Like, let's talk about it right now. Let's acknowledge it now. Like, if it's painful right now, let's like, hey, let's not ignore it and sweep it under the rug and just say, let's hope that never happens again. But like, talk about it now, because it's not acceptable.
Love it.
But again, in a way that educates, not shames people.
That's such a huge thing, right? And that's on the teacher to really balance that out.
Yeah. Which is in progress. I mean, I definitely was like, oh, there are always so many tools of how to balance that because it can be so awkward.
Oh yeah, and we're just human. We're trying, right? I could talk to you all day, Courtney. You're fascinating and intelligent, but we got to wrap this up. So tell me, where do you want to send people? What links? What plugs?
I would say, because if folks are watching this, they may not necessarily be in Boston. So I would say find me on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. It's just my first and last name. I'm pretty easy to find. That's a great place to connect with me. And then just as a resource in the improv community, you can always come and talk to me. And then from there, we'll find more links.
Truth.
That's it. Yeah.
Courtney Pong, you are hilarious, amazing, and what a great leader of the community. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for being on The Breakdown.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about improv, please put them in the comments below. To get notified about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Roland and Rich's YouTube channel and click the little bell icon below. Thanks, improvisers, and keep making each other look good.